step back in time to South Trinidad in the 1970s, where a young man's journey of self-discovery and resilience unfolds amid challenges of poverty and racism, all driven by the hope for a brighter future. Ryan Bachoo's An Unending Search invites us into a world of ambition, transformation, and possibility, one that feels relatable to persons today as well as persons born during that era. Tropical Literature Creators continues to showcase authors of Caribbean heritage, continues to support Caribbean authors, recommend authors who you would think should be featured, and subscribe to the channel on various platforms, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, as well as various social media accounts. Next, a brief introduction to the book before our featured interview.
An Unending Search was written by me, Ryan Bachoo. The West Indian fiction is set in rural South Trinidad in the late 70s and takes the reader on a journey of a teenage protagonist called Tar, who, through the book, tries to find his way out of the cane fields towards the promised land of New York or London.
Greetings, listenership. Welcome to TLC Tropical Literature Creatives, the podcast where we interview authors of Caribbean heritage about themselves and about their literary works. Today we have with us award-winning journalist Ryan Bachoo, author of the book An Unending Search. Ryan, welcome to Tropical Literature Creatives.
I really appreciate you having me on.
Well, thank you for agreeing to be interviewed, Ryan. Usually when it is that persons that come to the podcast, I usually give them a scenario. So with you, it isn't going to be any different. The scenario is this. Imagine you're at the airport. You encounter someone who comes to Trinidad for the very first time. What would you recommend that they try if it is that they come to Trinidad? What food would you recommend that they try? What place would you recommend that they go to? Anything.
Yeah, so I would definitely recommend that they should take a trip to Tobago, if even for one day, and they should definitely try the callaloo and dumpling there. I don't even think Trinidadians make it like Tobagonians. And if you want, I don't eat meat, but you can throw in maybe crab or fish as you see it. Places to visit. I just feel like Paramin is a hidden gem. A lot of people know about it, but then there are so many more people who don't know about it. And I would encourage visitors. I know the visitors love to flock to beaches and the Caroni Swamp and the Pitch Lake in La Brea. But Paramin, take a drive up Paramin. Try to get one of the tours done. I promise locals and visitors alike, they will never regret it.
And as you're saying it like that, Ryan, it sounds like a plug for tourism there. I mean, I know you have the background in journalism and everything, but it sounds like
honestly,
a paid ad as well,
Yeah, it might sound like that, but honestly, I sound like a visitor myself because when I went up the Paramin Hills just about 2 months ago, I was blown away that place existed. I did not know that it's such beautiful nature existed in all of its exuberance in the way that it was. And it was just so neatly tucked away in the hills of Paramin that I myself felt like a tourist in my own country.
No, and I can relate to that because Trinidad and Tobago, in fact, they're filled with so many wonders, so many places that we ourselves who are here, we take it for granted and we don't seem to capitalize on what it is that we have. So when it is that visitors come and they tell us about it, we're like, it's a surprise to us as well.
Yeah, I mean, seeing pictures of that place is one thing, but actually being there, it really is breathtaking. And the earlier in the day you go to see the sunrise and the early morning, the more incredible it is.
Oh man, that is fantastic. That is fantastic. Well, I know we could talk more and more about Trinidad, but let's just get into the actual interview, the reason why we're here today. One of the things that we are aware of is that you're an award-winning journalist. Can you give us some details in terms of the accolades or the awards that you would have been the recipient of?
Yeah, I've been a journalist for the last 15 years, and part of my journalism career saw me produce 3 documentaries. Now, I have a particular interest in religion, so my documentaries have always sort of connected with religion in many ways. I produced a documentary in 2019, 2020, and then 2022. Actually, it aired in 2023 of January, and that same year I won the Caribbean Broadcasting Union's award for Best Documentary in the Caribbean. And then I've been Editor of the Year at my company where I work for at CNC3 Television under the umbrella of Guardian Media Limited twice in 2 years. So yes, I've I've been honored throughout, parts of those 15 years with different accolades.
15 years, that's like a long time. I mean, it's if it is that you were to measure 15 years, it might be the age of a teenage child or something like that. So your career is like your child.
Yeah, I think so. 15 years, it's been a lot. It's been very long, but as you mentioned, it's still very much in a phase where there is still so much. You've learned so much, but there's still so much to learn. So you're quite right in sort of comparing it to a teenager, because I feel as though I am still very young. I feel like I've come a long way, but I feel like there's still so far to go after 15 years. So I think you're quite right.
With the awards that you've won, like for the documentary and for being an editor, it sounds like you have experience both being in front of the camera and being, behind the pen, so to speak. Uh, how would that have affected you putting together this book on the whole? With these experiences, putting together a documentary and being an editor, would that have given you like an edge compared to other persons in putting together this book that you would have written?
I think so. I think journalism really complemented being an author, being able to sometimes edit people's work in the job that I am in, being able to see things from a lens of perspective of being on television and then being behind the scenes. I do think that it did contribute in a very major way to how I wrote this book. It's very interesting because, I also feel like I'm a very private person. And so when those cameras switch off, I was able to sit behind my laptop and really punch away a world that really doesn't exist because it's fictional. But it took me away. It took me away from the spotlight. It took me away from everything that was journalism, and it allowed me to travel my own imagination into this book.
You had mentioned that you, in terms of putting the book together, when your lights came off, you would spend time typing away at your laptop. A lot of persons, for example, authors, have different processes that they use for their writing. They may write like a paragraph a day, a chapter a day. For you putting this book together, what was your process? Was it just like something like that, or was it like, inspiration would hit you and you just like tap away and just be there for hours in a zone?
Yeah, I don't know how people can write a paragraph a day. It just doesn't feel accomplished to me. So what I did was I set minor goals for myself. I wanted to finish chapter 1 by the end of this month, which would be, maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks to write that chapter, and then maybe restructure it, re-engineer it, read it over, change what needs to be changed, or scrap it altogether and rewrite it. But I think the overarching thing for me while writing this book was that I know that creative people need not to be pressured, but I did put a lot of pressure on myself. I wanted to be able to keep punching away at that keyboard to write this book. And so when I was done working, I finished work at 8 p.m. I got home just before 9. I would have a shower and maybe something very light to eat. And then I from 9 p.m. till about 1 a.m. most days, sometimes 2 a.m., I would do a lot of my writing while I was at home at night after a day's work, and it sort of helped because it took me away from the rigors of journalism during the day into this imaginary world, this fictional world at night. But I wanted to keep writing. I think that was key for me, and I think that's key for any author. I'm not a professional, but I do think that it's not enough for an author to say, I'm not feeling very creative today, or I can't be pressured into writing. I think it's important as an author for you to keep writing. You can always revisit and rewrite and scrap pieces and rewrite it, but I think it's very important to keep writing. And I think, honestly, since I've published this book, I'll be honest with you, a lot of people say I've started books, but I can never finish it. Well, that's part of the problem, because if we give ourselves too much leverage, then, we'll find excuses all of the time. Years go by and we're not able to finish it. And so that's why I think I set very strict deadlines for myself to be able, and I put a lot of pressure on myself to go home after long days of work and to write until 1 a.m.
Dan, it's interesting that you say that because being a self-published author, like you said, you put a lot of pressure on yourself because at the same time, it doesn't sound like you had like a contract with a publishing company or anything like that, where you had like deadlines to meet. It's something that was self-imposed and you stuck with that. And I think that's really admirable. I one of I one of the things I was going to ask is one of it is you had mentioned that one of the skills that you had is being in the field of editing, and I know that a lot of authors usually require the services of an editor. In your situation, is it something that you did? Did you get the services of an editor, or did you draw upon your own skills to get the job done?
Three editors, actually. I will tell you that being an editor in a journalism newsroom is vastly different from editing a piece of work that is a novel. And so, I had three editors look at this book at different periods and ultimately compile what the book is now and that has been published. Did it help being an editor? Of course it helped. You get to look at certain aspects of the book, sentence construction, grammatical errors. You get to look at punctuations and those things you'd be able to pick up on as an editor. Very different art and should not be confused with journalism or any other field of writing. That is very specific and that is very, very different. And so I was not ever going to fool myself that because I have the title of an editor in a newsroom and several years as an editor that I can edit my own book. Impossible. There are people who are experts in that. There are people who are paid to do that. There's a reason why they are paid to do that. And so I followed that routine.
In terms of the work that the editors did, were you satisfied with it in the sense that, they would butcher your work, they would take chunks out and say, nah, this wouldn't work, you have to go back and do this again? I mean, did your relationship with them change after? Did it remain cordial, or did it feel like resentment towards them, to the way that they treated your work?
I really like that you asked that question because I want to answer it in two parts. The first part is no. But let me say why no. I think a younger me would have been resentful and frustrated and just trying to get this thing out and see it as a barrier. But I think a more mature me understands that they are seeing things and they understand things that I don't understand. And so I entered that editorial process with a very open mind, with them being able to say, we need to change this, we need to edit that part, we need to take this out, we need to change that. And so I had a very open mind about it, and I had set about wanting to know how we can better this book for publication. And I think that's key. The second part is that I want to speak directly to your audience who may have that sense of immaturity when it comes to having their books edited. They may be frustrated after writing 12, 13, 15 chapters of a book to have to rewrite parts and to have to see what they deem very important parts be pulled apart or pulled out altogether. That's something that you have to come to terms with. It's something that the greats such as Naipaul and Walcott, even they had editors who had to read their work and criticize their work and critique their work and change their work. And they were Nobel laureates. So I say all of that to say, it's not just us as rookie writers. The best of writers have had their work edited and pulled apart, and it's a very essential component when it comes to writing a book. And so my advice to any author who is about to have editors look at their work, be open-minded. Don't think that you think you have the perfect manuscript and they're going to write you back and say, God, this is perfect, go ahead and print. No. They're going to find things in there. They're going to have different perspectives. They're going to have different interpretations, right? And you need to be as open-minded as you can be to accept that. And I think that worked in my favor.
Okay. Well said. Obviously, you had options where the book was concerned. Why did you choose the self-publishing option?
Well, I didn't know the options. Honestly, I thought that when I was finished with this book, I thought that was it. I didn't realize that writing a book is merely 60% of the work. That's it. Writing a book is not 100%. You're not done when you finish, when you put the final full stop in the final chapter. You're not done. You're actually 60% done. Uh, Having this book published is 40% of the work. It's a large part of the book. I didn't know. I didn't know how to get a publisher. I didn't know who was a publisher. I really didn't know. And what I had to do when I finished this book on April 1st, 2024, is I had to embark on learning, and I continue to learn about the publication process and the marketing process of this book. But I think that's where I was very naive. I thought that when I had finished writing this book on April 1st, 2024, that the book was done. The book was nowhere close to being finished. I spent the rest of that year trying to figure out how I can publish this book. And so, I got frustrated because I didn't know the right people in the right places. So I ended up self-publishing. And, it's just been so gratifying to know that I've been able to get such good responses for a self-published book, because apparently it seems as though in the industry, in this book industry that I'm very new to, that self-publishing books are, I don't know, perhaps, looked down on, I guess, for lack of better words, than published books, than those books that have a publisher. But, I've been very lucky to have gotten very good reviews in a self-published book. But it's a process that I had to learn about, and I continue to learn about every day.
That's an encouraging statement to make. I mean, because like you said, it's self-publishing. It's looked down a little because in some instances persons don't put out the effort, and this is talking with other authors who do the self-publishing. A lot of persons, they try to cut corners, like where artwork is concerned, for example, the look and the feel of the book. And because of that, persons kind of look down on the book as something that is, for want of a better term, that is inferior in terms of content. But when it is that you put out the effort, the presentation and everything, a self-published book, it shines, because it's not just your work in terms of just writing it and everything. You have to coordinate the artwork, make sure that the artist, has the cover that you want to have your work represented in, etc. So yeah, that is really encouraging to know. But we've spoken a little bit about the process. We've spoken a little bit about yourself. Let's get into the book itself. When I was reading the book, going it over, one of the things that kind of got my attention is that usually in books it would say something like, characters in this book, are fictional, and any resemblance to persons who are alive or dead are purely coincidental. But I didn't see any, sort of disclaimer like that in your book. Maybe I missed it, but it kind of stood out to me. And even though I know you said that your book is a book of fiction, were there persons alive who would have influenced the story and the characters that are contained in the pages of your book?
So, that's a tricky one. I have a belief that no book is truly fictional. Even fictional books are not truly fictional. Why do I say that? Because although the characters' names and experiences and the story may actually be fictional, not true, doesn't exist, never existed, I do believe that every author draws from their own experiences of the lives they live, be it in a community or in their country or whatever situation they have found themselves in, their life experiences. And it's drawn from that. I don't think it's possible to write a book where an author completely writes from a scenario that they've never been in. And so I say all of that to say that, the book that I wrote, yes, the characters are fictional. Yes, the storyline is not a storyline that I've ever heard in my life or seen in my life. But the book itself draws from the experiences of growing up in South Trinidad, growing up with elders who would have worked in the cane fields for decades and hearing their stories and sort of kind of, putting my own little twist on it. So, is it fictional? Yes, the story doesn't exist. There isn't somebody called Tar, there isn't somebody called Uncle Sundar. But, but in our own little village, in our own little community, in our own little town, there were pockets of stories where young men had to go into the cane fields very young, Maybe they didn't smoke as much or drink as much, but those scenarios existed, and I was able to draw from those experiences. But it's, I can't write about something that I've never really, had deep thought or experience in. I hope I make sense, or at least you understand where I'm coming from.
I do. Seeing that a lot of his story takes place in South Trinidad, can I take it for granted that you're from South Trinidad as well?
Yeah, Princestown to be exact. I grew up in Princestown in South Trinidad in throughout the 90s.
Okay. So I guess, the places that you would have written about, maybe the streets that you would have passed, Raspy Street, others that, you would have passed on, seen, and would have been able to draw inspiration on to put in your writing.
So Rapsy Street is a fictional street, doesn't exist. But again, yes, you're absolutely right in the sense that the streets of Princestown and how it was built and the people that live there and the importance of the sugar industry to the people that lived in those streets and that town, yes, it really all influenced how I have written that book.
You could have chosen like any period of history. You could have chosen 2024. You could have chosen like 2019. Why choose to place a story in the backdrop of that era, 1970s? Was there a reason for choosing that era, that period?
Yes, there is actually. It's interesting because I grew up in the 90s reading a lot of Naipaul and Selvan, Walcott and Lamming and Anthony, and their books were actually set in that period, the 60s and the 70s, and maybe sometimes even the 50s. And I fell in love with West Indian literature because of Lamming, because of Naipaul, because of Selvan and Anthony. I fell in love, like head over heels in love with West Indian literature because of these giants of West Indian literature. And so when I set about writing this book in 2009, I wanted to write like Naipaul. I was inspired by Naipaul's Miguel Street. And so I wanted to write as though I was him and I was Selvan. And so I sort of connected my writing with the era of their writing. But then it took on a life of its own because I realized that a lot of people, a lot of the generation that came before me, lived through that era, whether they were teenagers, whether they were young adults, and they themselves wanted to reconnect with that era. And they couldn't do it with television. They couldn't do it with the radio. But I thought that they could do it with books. And so I think that's where a large part of the success of this book has laid. A lot of people tell me who grew up in that era that, gosh, this takes me back to a time when I was young. And I love hearing that. So I think on twofold, I would say that, reading the works of these great West Indian writers is what inspired me to write a book of that era. But also, I think there is an appetite for West Indian literature from what is a very important and very interesting period in Trinidad and Tobago and Caribbean history. Because in that period, you have the Black Power movement, you have, racialism stirring up again. You have the Williams government in rule, but then Williams comes and he dies in 81. You have these dynamic stories being played out across Trinidad and Tobago. And I think it was just really interesting to put that into a novel.
Right, and I like that. All it is that you said you were influenced by these writers. In a sense, your book is sort of like a tribute to them as well. So, yeah, that.
I think that's a great compliment. Yeah, thank you. Yes, I appreciate hearing that.
And one of the things I also picked up on what you were saying as well, you said that you started this book in 2009. Is that what you said, or was it 2019?
2009, I actually started writing this book in August 2009, and I spent 5 years in between 2009 and 2014 writing the first draft. When I was done with the first draft, I remember contacting an editor who said that it would cost $10,000 to copy edit the book, and I did not have that money at that point in time. Nor did I think that the book was good enough to publish. Honestly, I looked at it when I was done and I did not believe that the book was good enough to publish. And so I put it down but I thought I would come back to it at some point in my life. And then in 2023, I picked it up again and I said, you know what, let me have an editor look at it. And I had an editor look at it. She said that the book was too long. We needed to cut it in half. And we needed to re-engineer the storylines and plots and everything. And so I set about all of 2024 really trimming the story down, reworking the book, reworking the angles, sometimes even the characters, to get it to publication. So it was a quite long journey.
I it is a lengthy journey, but again, I mean, the more that I talk with authors like yourself, it's the more that I'm intrigued, because there are some authors who finish the book in like a matter of weeks or months, and there are persons like yourself where it takes years. It's just like you, they write it, they put it down, stuff happens, and then they come back and they revisit it. And again, with the advent of something like self-publishing, it changes the game where your literature is able to make its way out there to person's shelves and in person's hands, and persons are able to be exposed to the world that you would have created. And it's really wild the way that things would have changed. What do you hope readers from different cultural backgrounds will learn from Tah's journey?
A few things. First of all, I feel like for us here in the Caribbean, history is not important. But the rest of the world takes history, it's very important. The rest of the world takes history very important. So the historical perspective of what life was like, while fictional, is still very accurate. And those are not my words, those are prominent people's words, and those are readers' words as well, if you read some of the reviews. So I think the historical aspect of An Unending Search is very accurate to what life was like back in the 70s and then early 80s. So I hope that they grasp a sense of history and the importance of history in one of Trinidad and Tobago's most important sectors, which would be the agricultural/sugar sector.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that I hope that they come to terms with everybody, 7 billion of us, 8 billion of us on this planet. We're all on our own journey. And that journey is different for everyone, difficult for everyone. And we're all in search of something. We all continue to be in search of something. And perhaps the most important lesson out of this book is that this search that we are on, what we think we are searching for, is not actually what we're searching for. We think we want things, but as human beings, we're not totally satisfied with any one thing. Once we get that one thing, we're always in pursuit of something else and something else and something else. And it's just this unending search towards what we're looking for. And finally, I think if you read the book, I've gotten a few complaints that a lot of people didn't like the ending. They wish that the ending was different. Well, at the end of the book, the protagonist finds what he was looking for, finds what Uncle Sundar had been influencing him all along for all 12 chapters. And then, having found this thing, he realizes this is not exactly what was promised to him. And so he ends back up right where he started. I think finally a key lesson is that things don't always work out in the way that we hoped it would work out. Things don't work out for all of us. It works out for some, it doesn't work out for others. And that's just life. And I think this book, beyond the happy ending that people had hoped for, beyond the optimistic and hopeful ending that people had hoped for or want, I think that the book tries to show that in life, not everyone, while you hope for a happy ending for yourself and for your friends and for your family, not everyone has a happy ending. And I think that's another lesson that I hope that people sort of draws from the book.
Yes. Ryan, I mean, I feel like you're cutting into my questions here, because I mean, when you give a response there, I have like these questions, and it's like you cut down a whole bunch of them. But that's fine. Because I was going to ask, I mean, like young persons reading this book, I mean, what, can some of the takeaways be? And here it is, you answer the question. And growing up, sometimes we expose that. Sometimes we think that, chasing the thing would be the thing. And when we get the thing, it's not the thing. Sometimes there's
Yeah,
a, yeah.
that's a really interesting point because for young people who are reading this book, the interpretation of this book is going to be vastly different from their parents who would have grown up in the 60s and the 70s. It's a vastly different interpretation of this text from their parents. For young people,
Mhm.
young people will almost journey with Tar, if you understand what I mean. Tar is 15 years old and he's on a journey. And young people who are 12, 13, 14, 15, young adults, 18, 19, they're going to be journeying with him on a similar journey.
Mhm.
Maybe they're not looking for a way out of the cane fields, but maybe they're looking for a way out of the Caribbean. Maybe the Caribbean they feel is too small. Maybe the Caribbean they feel is too third world. Maybe TikTok and Instagram show them a more grander life that awaits them in Europe and the United States and other parts of the world. And so maybe that's their cane field. Maybe that's the cane field that they're trying to get out of and the promised land that they're trying to get to, similarly to Tar. And I think for young people, their interpretation may be really, they can connect with the frustration that Tar felt. They can connect with this goal that they're seeing on TikTok, on Instagram, and social media, because that's what social media shows you. It shows you the success and the grandeur of the life that some of these celebrities live. And so while Tar would have read about it in the newspaper, they're seeing it on social media. So I think there are connections with how the young audience will have similar frustrations and similar journeys to that of the book. But their interpretation is going to be vastly different from ours.
I mean, that's a lot to digest. And it does make some sense because Tar is about the same age as teenagers as well. And it's interesting because uh, even though times have changed, sometimes we think that, I mean, I remember when I was a young person, we don't want to go back into numbers, etc., but I was a young person at some point in time. And sometimes it felt like, it was a lot of pressure being a teenager. You had to decide what it is that you wanted to be and you're not really sure. And you had to make decisions, etc. And here it is, we find Tar, 15 years old, and there are a number of inciting incidents that he faces. And I don't want to set out too much about the book for persons who haven't read it, but he has to make decisions. And, it seems like a lot because at some point, I'm thinking, I have to go back and just remind myself that Tar is a teenager. He's 15. But I'm reading
Mm-hmm.
it and I'm thinking to myself, you sure this guy is 15? Because I mean he's put into situations where he has to do things and it sounds like, he's like an adult. But here it is, we have a teenager having to make adult decisions. In a sense, he kind of has to grow up. And
So,
it
so I think the book tries to portray this 50. You're very right. You're spot on. The book portrays Tar, this 15-year-old, as a force-ripe man. He's a force-ripe man. That's what he is. He's a young boy who is forced because of circumstances and because of societal, socioeconomic challenges. He has to become a man faster and earlier than he is ready to be a man. And so, he smokes and he drinks because he thinks he's a man and he has responsibilities of a man, although he's very young. His parents are not rich and they cannot afford to take care of him in the way that the way of life and the luxury of life would be afforded to young people in the 90s. And so they don't pay as much attention to him as a parent should. And so he has decisions to make very early on. And so that's why he's this force-ripe man who has to make decisions, and he's leaning on Uncle Sundar. His only influence is Uncle Sundar, a village elder who's a racist and who doesn't have an education and who is not able to guide him very well. But that's the only influence that he has because he doesn't have anybody else around him. And so you're very right in saying that he has responsibilities beyond his years because he's a forced-ripe man.
Yeah, and it's really, and it makes for an interesting read. It does. Thanks to Ryan for sharing his journey with us. Although we spoke about his book, he shared some insights about himself, and we are all the better for it. A call for our listeners, a call to never stop searching for purpose and self-improvement. Until next time, keep seeking, keep growing, and subscribe to Be in the Know for the TLC Tropical Literature Creatives.